And we're live. So good evening, everyone. Hope you're really, really well. After quite a rainy day today, it's been miserable most of the day. I don't know what it's like where you are, Mike, but it's been torrential rain, and then the sun's came out this last hour and a half. And of course, I'm sweating in this back bedroom where the sun just hits it in the evening. So apologies in advance for me sweating. But yeah, delighted to have Mike with us tonight. So he's a self-build expert, and this is a bit different subject for us that we haven't really covered. You know, every other week we try and cover a property-related subject, maybe a new strategy, but building your own home is probably something that is relevant to everyone, whether you're a property investor or not. And it's great to narrow in, I guess, and niche into the sustainable view of a passive house as well, and understand what that is. Sustainability is sustainable housing is something that is kind of large on the agenda. So it's great to be able to unpick that and understand a bit more about that tonight, Mike. But just before we get into it, is it worth giving just the guys and girls a bit of an introduction to yourself and a bit about your background?
Yeah, surely. Yeah. Well, as I say, my name is Mike Cruickshank, and I've been in property in various disguises for about 45 years, as the kind of grey hairs would probably suggest.
I know I've got the grey hairs, but I've not got the experience.
So, started life in the architectural world, moved on to building control, local authority, then a Canadian investment company, then went self-employed doing architectural practice, and then I joined Scott Frame, the timber frame manufacturer who supplied lots of self-build for the self-build sector. I was sales director with them for 26 years. Left in May 2017, and have been doing kind of property investment, consultancy, project management, and continuing on my my property investment journey. So yeah, fairly broad base. I think I have what I tend to call a QBE, and people say, what the hell's a QBE? And I said, well, probably qualified by experience. And I think that's probably one of the best qualifications you can actually have. But I have to admit that every day is a school day. You never know it all. So you're always learning.
Yeah, I love that. I never heard that before. A QBE. I need to QBE. I need to take that down. And it's just out of curiosity, I guess. So have you got experience in the buy-to-let space, like HMO residential space, or has it always generally been, I guess, self-build and kind of ground up?
Well, I've actually self-built twice. So self-built in Aberdeen and self-built in Donegal in Ireland. Wow. But as far as my property investment's concerned, I mean, I started as most people do, and it was kind of buy-to-let. And then I changed some of them into service accommodation. I had a small shop, so a bit of commercial, which in actual fact was, the best yielding one I had of them all, and it was hands-free, fully repairing, insuring lease. And I had a wee bit of kind of development land as well. So, fairly broad based. But yes, as I say, started as everyone or most people do in the kind of buy-to-let. Never been involved with HMOs. I think if you're in England, it's probably an attractive proposition, but in Scotland, the regulations tend to make it, pretty difficult, I think. So I've never really ventured into that area.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. We went down to, we just finished our first HMO, but that's down in Wallasey, and we did that for the exact same reason. We just found it was a little bit difficult, but I know plenty of people, like, I guess, doing them up in our neck of the woods as well, but which is fair play to them. But I've always found it just a bit too challenging, or the numbers don't work. But that's great. I mean, you're basically right. Your experience, your QBE is across the breadth of property. So both kind of building from the ground up, but also your more traditional buy-to-lets, and you're into commercial as well, which is fantastic. Absolutely. So
yeah. My focus this next while is going to be in commercial, because I just think there's more flexibility in that, and you can be a bit more creative within the commercial sphere than you can in residential, because the government have really almost putting landlords off, despite the fact that we have a chronic housing shortage. They're almost disincentivizing the private rented sector, which is a very, very important kind of part of the whole housing provision within the UK. But that is what it is, and you just have to work within the rules, regulations that are there.
Yeah, it's a difficult one. I'm sure we could be spending all night talking about the rights and many wrongs, I guess, of legislation at the moment. But yeah, let's get on to building your own passive house. I've got to be honest with you. When we started first speaking about it, I said, look, it'd be great, like talking about like buying your own home. What a fantastic aspiration it is. Passive house was a new concept. Obviously, the clues in the title, you can kind of guess that it's around the links around sustainability. But do you want to just tell us a little bit about what that is, and why would people be interested in, I guess, building a passive house?
Okay, so we should maybe just kind of backpedal a little bit, just in terms of, if you actually putting 100 people in a room and saying, forgetting about not being able to find a plot to finance it, if you had the opportunity, would you like to build your own house? 99% of people would say definitely they would like to build their own house. It's the aspiration that most people would actually have. So from that point of view, it is very, 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 very attractive. In terms of passive house, well, it actually originates from, it's a German concept. It's passive Haus, Passivhaus is where it actually originates from. And it's a system whereby you build a house that is very, very thermally efficient, the fabric of a house. And by that, I mean the floor, the walls, the roof, and the windows and doors. Make them as thermally efficient as you possibly can. So any heat you're paying to generate is actually contained within the house. And then you have to look at ventilation, because it's all very well saying, right, I've got a very thermally efficient house, but if you're losing all that heat through uncontrolled ventilation, or what you and I would commonly refer to as drafts, then you've wasted your money. So the combination of the two are absolutely key. So you want to make it as thermally efficient as you can, and you want to make it as airtight as you possibly can. Now that then brings in the third aspect, and that is that you're then required to ventilate it properly. So because obviously we, just by naturally breathing, by cooking, by bathing, showering and the rest, that obviously generates moisture-laden air. Now that moisture-laden air has got to escape somewhere. In the old drafty houses, it was never a problem. There may be an open chimney, or gale force winds coming through the actual windows. So that was never a problem, because the air was being replaced all the time just with the drafts. But in a modern house, that's not the case, because it is sealed. So that really needs to be dealt with by, in majority of occasions, it'd be done with what they call a mechanical ventilation heat recovery system. And what that does in simple terms is it takes in fresh air from outside, and the moisture-laden air from inside actually passes across a heat exchanger. So it's obviously been warmed up to the ambient temperature within the house. And the cold, fresh air coming in actually gets preheated with the heat that is from the exhaust air. So that means that when that fresh air comes in, you're not starting from external temperatures. It's actually already had a bit of a boost. So the energy, in order to get it up to the ambient temperature again, is reduced, and in turn will reduce your energy consumption. The other thing that you need to kind of bear in mind for passive house as well is they do look in order to maximize the benefits you can get from solar gain. So, if you've got a conservatory, what like it is, if it's south-facing conservatory, the amount of heat it generates in there can be, phenomenal. So, and that's free. So you obviously want to try and position your windows such that you're maximizing that solar gain and minimizing any windows that are in the north elevation, because obviously that tends to be the cold, side of the house. So even by designing the house and having your living accommodation where you would spend most of your time, and maybe kitchen and lounge areas, have them where they're going to benefit from the sun and the solar gain, and obviously the improved lighting levels there, and then have your bedrooms maybe on the north side of the house where it tends to be cooler, because most of us like to have a kind of cooler bedroom than we do kind of living kitchen areas. So that's all part and parcel of the actual design. But just going back to the ventilation side, it's quite an interesting statistic that many houses, well, all houses these days have got to be what they call pressure tested. So they do it with an air blower door test. And in effect, you put a frame in the front door, it connects up to a fan, which in turn connects up to a computer, and they will pressurize the actual house. So dependent how fast the fan has got to go in order to maintain the pressure will dictate how airtight the actual house is. Now, in a passive house, you've got to be down at somewhere in the region of about 0.6 air changes per hour at 50 Pascal. Now, when you consider most houses building regulation-wise these days are at 10, you'll see how stringent passive house the passive house regulation actually is. And if you're putting that into some kind of idea of, just to give you an idea, if you can imagine that like a single garage door, well, that's probably going to give you an air pressure test of maybe somewhere between 10 and 15. And if you're looking at passive house where it's 0.6, then you're basically looking at the size of a kind of credit card. So that gives you an idea as to the gaps that you're allowed in the external fabric of the house in order to get down to that kind of levels. And the fact that you are keeping the heat in the house, it means that you require very, very little central heating. In fact, we've actually supplied houses that don't have a central heating system at all. I actually did an article for the YPN magazine, the first of their kind of going green supplements, which was in, I think it was April 2019. And I said, look, you don't have to build a house with central heating. Now, most people would, raise their eyebrows and say, well, that's just not possible. But yeah, it is possible. And it was done in the borders of Scotland. I'm not even talking about
really? I was going to ask, was that like the South Coast as opposed to?
That's invariably what people say, Darren. Yes, exactly. Yeah. It wasn't. It was in the borders of Scotland where it can get pretty cold. Now I know the builder who actually built it, and he was extremely nervous because it was the client that really drove the fact he wasn't wanting central heating. And the builder kept on saying to him, look, from an insurance policy, do you not think you should put in some form of heating? No, he definitely wasn't going to do it. So went ahead, built the house, no central heating. And now the client who stays in the house with his elderly parent actually takes great delight in phoning James every now and again when it's really cold outside and says, James, it's -5 outside. I still don't have any central heating. So he kind of rubs his nose in it a bit. So perfectly possible.
That's phenomenal. I mean, obviously, my next question was going to say, like, I guess, why would people want this? Like, what sort of people would be looking for this? Is this clearly from an energy efficiency point of view, you can get it. One of the savings, you don't even need a central heating system. That's not to say you shouldn't have one, I guess, but it's possible that you don't need to have one. And that's even up in Scotland where we're used to the low temperatures. So I guess from a savings point of view, that's going to be, that's going to be one of the main benefits to get that. And what sort of costs are you looking at to I guess, create that concept? And how does the cost differ from, say, if you went for a typical self-build project?
Yeah, well, I think, pretty much, by regulation these days, we all are forced to build houses that are a lot thermally efficient than they were even in the last 5-10 years. So there is generally a drive towards reduction in CO2 emissions, for obvious reasons, the whole global warming issue. So that, that agenda is only going to increase and increase. Now, in the UK, we've always tended to lag behind our European counterparts. I mean, I can remember early days when I was working with the council and we imported the Swedish houses. Now, at the time, they had 6-inch fiberglass insulation in the walls and 8-inch insulation in the roof space. Now, our regulations at the time was 1 inch of insulation in the roof space. So, the difference even back then was absolutely incredible. But we have caught up a fair bit, to be fair. But the regulations are only going to go one way. They're only going to become more stringent and more stringent. And certainly, as of 2025, for example, I think gas central heating is no longer going to be allowed in a new build. So we're going to see a lot more people actually installing probably electric heating, which a lot of people perceive as being expensive. But if you put in the right electric heating system and you have a well-insulated and airtight house, you're not requiring a heavy energy load in order to get the ambient temperature up to the levels that are perfectly comfortable. So you're definitely going to see more and more of that.
And it's more, you touch on the move towards electric heating systems as well. The technology change in that and the efficiency has moved on leaps and bounds, even from when I can remember, like even say 10 years ago or something like that. It's moved on incredibly. So
absolutely, the sort of days of the big storage heaters and off-peak heating, they're long gone. I mean, people are using infrared heaters now, which they're becoming more of the vogue. And the best way you can describe them is it's almost like you actually feel as if you're in sunlight. Now there's not actually a light as such, but it's just you get that same feeling as if the sun is actually hitting you, and it tends to heat up the fabric within a particular room. So then that starts generating heat as well. So I think you'll see probably more of that type of installation in the future.
So is there much, what would be the, I guess, pounds and pence sort of cost differential? I know it obviously differ between, build to build, or even what's the percentage difference would you be talking about? Is it, 10, 15% more expensive to get that level of kind of air tightness, I guess, in the property?
It depends on what statistics you look at. But I mean, in effect, it's generally accepted it's probably somewhere between 10 to 20%. Now, what I would say is that most people don't actually build to Passive House certified standards, because you can't actually go and get it fully certified, which means then you get a certificate that actually says that this is a fully certified Passive House. What most people will do is actually build using Passive House principles, but not actually get it certified, because that's obviously another scale of fees in order to get it to the kind of fully certified stage. So most people will just build to Passive House principles rather than full Passive House certified.
What's the benefit of the certification? I imagine that's quite niche then, is it? Just for...
Yeah, well, it just means that
badge of honour.
Yeah, there is that. With that badge of honour that you are living in a passive house. Now, again, as the name would suggest, you would think it's only for houses, but it doesn't have to be. I mean, it can be commercial buildings. I mean, I know of nurseries being done, offices being done. So it's the same principle. It's just making the fabric of the building thermal efficient and airtight. Exactly the same principles for the commercial world as it is for the domestic world. And some people actually ask, is it possible to upgrade my existing house to Passive House standards? Well, the quick answer is yes, but dependent on the age of the house will depend how much money you would have to throw at it in order to get it up to that kind of passive house levels. Because you can imagine, houses built at the turn of the century had virtually no insulation in them. They had suspended timber floors, great big open vents and outside air to ventilate underneath the floor. The windows are probably sash and case windows that, your curtains are almost hanging horizontally and, in the high winds. So all these things would go against making it passive. So you'd have to do fairly extensive remedial works in order to get anywhere close to kind of passive house levels. But it can still be worthwhile.
Yeah, and I suppose that's the thing. Even if you're not building it, there may be an aspiration there to, if you're going to be in somewhere for a significant amount of time. Like there is obviously, when say 10, 15 years ago when solar PV was coming in and you had these incentives for people to come on and get their solar PV and that's kind of died away a bit because you've not got the same government incentives, but a lot of people will be doing the exact same calculations there, right? I'm going to be in this house for 30, 40 years or something like that. Actually, that's going to pay itself back well within that time. Great, that's an option. Is that something that people would look at for a passive house that could also kind of have that same payback? Absolutely,
yeah. I mean, what you found is when there was the incentive that you were paying for any electricity you didn't use, you put it into the grid and you were getting extremely good returns. And that's why, some people were taking...
It's a FITs. I was going to say FITs. It was the feed-in tariffs, wasn't it? Yeah.
The feed-in, exactly. A lot of people were actually taking their money out of their, their ISAs and actually reinvesting it on and putting in photovoltaics, because actually you were getting a far better return for that, for your money. But that changed a bit. The government very quickly realized that this was going to cost them a fortune because people were jumping onto it and making really good money from it. So they quickly then start scaling back. So that the heat incentive now is nothing like what it used to be. But conversely, the actual price of photovoltaic panels have surprisingly dropped fairly dramatically as well. So you will find it, and you'll see it probably in most housing developments these days. You will see photovoltaic panels on the roof, because that is probably one of the cheapest ways of actually getting houses to comply, because they have to reach a certain level in terms of there's a SAP calculation going to be done, which is a standard assessment procedure, which in turn actually generates the energy performance certificate. So the energy performance certificate, you have to reach, attain certain levels for that. And in order to achieve that, sometimes you have to put in photovoltaics. Now, again, that's free energy, and you can use that to heat up all your domestic hot water, because if you've got a very thermally efficient and airtight house, the chances are that your main energy cost will not be in heating the house. It will be in supplying the domestic hot water. So if you've got photovoltaics on the roof and that's heating up, in effect, a heat store, or what most people would probably regard as being a hot water cylinder, and then you're drawing off the hot water from that, then that's free. And then anything over and above that, you could actually be putting on your washing machines during the day whilst it's generating electricity. So you're kind of doing it different to what it was in the old days, where the immersion heater was put on very, very rarely because it was expensive. For us, now if you're generating your own electricity, you want to get it into the heat up the hot water, and as I say, get all the washing done or the tumble drying done whilst it's generating electric, because that's obviously free. But the other thing to mention, Darren, is that energy cost on average double every 10 years. So the payback is obviously always going to be reduced as energy costs are only going to go one way, and that's up.
Yeah, and it's that. I mean, I've come from utilities, and we talked about the energy trilemma, which part of that obviously is like you want to keep the lights on, but you want to become more sustainable, and you want to make it affordable for people, and all those three things kind of play against each other to some degree. And clearly, we're moving more towards a sustainable energy source. In Scotland, I think it was definitely in Scotland. I don't know if it was the UK, but I'm sure over lockdown, we powered enough renewable energy for at least Scotland. But I think, was it the full UK?
I think, I'm not 100%, but I remember reading that statistic, and I'm the same as you. I can't remember. I think it was maybe just Scotland, because obviously up here, with all the wind farms we have up here, then there's a huge amount of energy being generated from them. So
that's phenomenal, and obviously, but the expense of that, it is more expensive, and I know there's a blend with different renewables in there, hydro and wave and whatnot. But it's definitely going to be more expensive. So that's a good point. I didn't realize that it was quite so, that increase. I guess when you put inflation against the backdrop, maybe brings it back slightly. It's just kind of tracking a bit of that trend. But 10 times or doubles every 10 years is like clearly something to make you sit up and take note of.
Take notice, exactly. What it does do as well is it allows you, if you're in a situation where you're wanting to buy a house and you're obviously taking into account what you're going to spend on your energy costs, then if you're not going to be spending that same amount and spending a fraction of that, then it gives you choices. It means that you could maybe then build a bigger house or build the same size of house but have more disposable income, because you're not going to be spending it on heating the house. So that can be a big incentive as well. So as I say, spending less on energy, but all love to be spending less and giving it to all these energy companies.
Yeah, I'm going to say nothing on that. I'll upset all the people I used to work with. But on the I've upset them anyway by leaving more than anything.
All these big companies, BP and Shell and all the rest of it, they're investing heavily in all these technologies. In fact, you see advertised on the TV all the time, all these big photovoltaic farms and all the rest of it. So
You have to be across everything. Yeah.
People have to change.
One thing I was going to ask in terms of the cost, so you'd say like maybe 10 to 20% potentially more expensive than, say, a traditional self-build project as it stands just now, varying in terms of the type of build. Are there any incentives? Are the government helping? Is there any subsidies? Is there any support for people looking to try and build to that additional standard?
Not really. No, I mean, the government, now and again will come out and say that they've got this kind of incentive and that incentive. The reality is trying to get access. There's so many hoops to jump through that's probably most people just wouldn't even bother. So no, there's generally not grants as such, for that type of thing. It's really more driven by in fact, the self-build sector probably drives it more than anyone else, because most people, when they're building their own house, don't want to just meet the minimum standard, which is a building regulation is. It is a minimum standard. They want to build to a higher standard, both in terms of the quality of the house and the whole thermal performance of the house, because particularly if it's a house that they think, well, this is a forever home, then you get one chance to do it cost effectively, and that's when you're building the house day one. To try and insulate the house and make it airtight after the event is always going to be a lot more expensive and a lot more disruptive.
Yeah, and it's trying to build something as well, and thinking about a legacy that you're going to pass on for generations. It's like thinking beyond even your own forever home. It's kind of beyond forever.
100%. That's what I say. I mean, in the course I do, that's one of the things I say. Look, if you care for the planet, and you care for the future generations, for your kids and your grandkids and beyond, then we all need to be doing something to reduce our energy consumption levels. Because in effect, at the moment, we're killing the planet. That's when you see the ice cap and all that being eroded all the time. It's pretty horrendous stuff that we're facing. So we need to take action, and we need to take action now. Yeah,
and just curious, you might not know the answer to this, but what sort of take do, say, other countries take? So obviously we're adopting it. It was like something that you'd said started in Germany, or at least the concept did that particular standard, I guess, of a passive house or passive house. It sounds quite Scottish, that name. Passive house. But yeah, what's the German government doing? Is there incentives? Are any other countries kind of taking a lead on supporting people to build to that sort of standard?
I'm honestly not sure if any other governments are actually giving incentives in terms of grants or whatever. I honestly don't know that. But I think certainly historically, up until probably within the last maybe 10 years, we have been kind of catching up, a fair bit. We have been, raising the bar probably a bit quicker than some of our European counterparts. But that's just really to get us back up on a par with them. Because as I said earlier, we've been lagging well behind a lot of our European counterparts in that respect. And bearing in mind the sort of, the temperatures that we face here in the UK, we should certainly be, should have been building a lot more thermal efficient than we have been. There's no question. But if you look at the, Canada and, America, all the Scandinavian countries, then they've always been very hot on having thermal efficient and airtight houses. I mean, double glazing across there was the norm decades and decades ago, and they're all building with triple glazing now, and we're still I've got some houses upgrading to double glazing.
All the buy-to-lets I seem to be buying are single glaze still. So
that's it, exactly that. So that the existing housing stock requires a lot of upgrading to increase its efficiency and reduction on CO2 emissions.
Yeah, that's an interesting point as well. You mentioned earlier around just the gap in good quality affordable housing being built anyway, and we've got this gap of the private residential sector. But actually, I guess it feels more like the pressure's on politically, at least on a numbers game, to get enough houses built and up, let alone increase the standard. Obviously, we're nudging the standard up all the time, but yeah, I suppose going and shooting for that most thermally efficient standard then is something which is not high on the government's agenda right now. So,
there's always a bit of a clash between the two. Yes, obviously we do want more houses. I mean, the government, in the recent white paper have recognised that their existing policy, whereby they were saying, right, planning departments need to be granting more planning permission, hasn't worked. I mean, the thought pattern was that if there's more houses given approval to build, then we'll be building more houses. The reality is, from as far back as the 1960s, every decade we've built less and less. So why is that? Well, when you consider that something like, I think it's 11 of the major house builders build 66% of the houses in the UK. And what they're doing is, they get planning permission, but what they do is just land bank it. So they're not actually building any more houses. Yes, there's a lot more planning permissions being granted that houses could be built, but they're not actually being built because they're just being land banked. Now, Boris's recent announcement, you'll remember probably the build, it was kind of highlighted as being, well, there's a kind of fairly major changes coming through the planning, which hasn't really been upgraded for about 35 years or more. So the idea there will be, may well be that there will be some form of punishment for these major house builders, whereby if they don't build within a certain period, then they will have to, pay heavily for it. So they have recognised that, they need to kind of address that and get more houses built in order to satisfy the absolutely chronic housing shortage, we face here in the UK.
Yeah, that's a really fair point.
And they have at long last, after a lot of lobbying, I have to say, after over a lot of years, they now do recognise that the self-build sector and the custom house sector have a big part to play. So they're actually now, in England, for example, there's the right to build legislation whereby local authorities have got to keep a list of people that would like to self-build, and then they've got to permission sites in order that these self-builders can self-build, and that's on a three-yearly rule. So we don't have that in Scotland at the moment. We're lobbying them hard in order to try and get that introduced in Scotland as well. You can certainly register in Scotland, but there's no legislation such that they have to provide planning permission for the self-build or custom build sector. But undoubtedly, we're going to see that kind of creeping into the legislation, which I think is only going to be about a good thing, and we'll see more and more people self-building. I mean, the interesting statistic is that in the UK, I think about 10% of all houses are built are self-build. If we look at likes of Austria, it's 80%. If we look even across the water in Ireland, it's something like 57%. So we lag miles behind here. We have a very unique house building system here, as I said earlier, whereby the major house builders supply the vast majority of houses, and that situation has to change.
Yeah, I have no idea about that. That's crazy.
It is crazy.
Absolutely crazy. 57% of the market new builds come from self-builds over in Ireland.
In Ireland, yes, exactly. They build their own houses, and whereas, as I say, here it's about 10%. So I've probably been generous at 10%, but
yeah,
that's absolutely atrocious.
Yeah, I mean, I had never even considered it. Isn't it strange around the models that we live in terms of the models that we have for our world? Because I've lived here and been raised in the UK, I have no other frame of reference.
Exactly.
I would just assume that was the same everywhere across the world. Yeah. But there you go.
Yeah, no. It's quite. I mean, I was quite astounded at the huge disparity when I actually found the stats. It was quite shocking.
Yeah. So coming back to the passive house, then I guess one of the questions that springs to mind. So I say, right, I love this concept. I'm going to be building a family home. I want to build one for future generations, not just myself.
Yeah.
Where would I start going about that? Do I need like specialist architects? Do I need specialist but where would I find the build teams that would build to that standard? How would I go about that? Your
first step would be to engage an architect who has gone through the passive house design. So it would be an architect that has got the certification to design to passive house standards, because then he or she would understand the whole principles of passive house and be able to design the house accordingly. When it comes to actually getting the house built, again, not all contractors are au fait with passive house or even building houses to reasonable thermal and airtight performance. So again, that's part and parcel of, there's a bit of a learning curve there. More and more contractors are becoming aware, but the vast majority are still probably not aware of the implications. And you get, it really has to be kind of toolbox talks for all the contractors, just to make them aware of what their actions are and how that can impact on reducing the air tightness for a house, for example. And you quite often see, if you take off the panel of the bath and you'll see where the waste goes through the floor, invariably what the plumber's done is just taken a great big hammer and punched a big hole through the chipboard floor. So the pipe goes through and there's probably about an inch gap all the way around the pipe. Well, in a passive house,
if you're lucky.
Yeah, exactly. That's just a huge path for air to leak through. So things like that, and even sockets in the walls, there would be grommets around where the actual cable passes through into the box. So you're into that, kind of that level of detail. And as I say, all the contractors need to be aware of that in order that they then don't what's the word I'm looking for? Don't make a mockery of the whole air tightness thing. They need to be aware of what they need to do in order to make it as airtight as possible, and more importantly, what not to do.
Yeah, so I mean, you've got that the standard and specification in terms of trying to, I guess, put in your works, whether it's your bathroom plumbing work, your sparky, your plaster, all of that stuff needs to all be. So is there specific build teams, full service build teams that would obviously need to be in to do that, or?
Yeah, you will see. You will see more and more contractors are actually specialising in that. So it's probably a bit of a niche at the moment, but I mean, you're definitely going to see more and more contractors kind of lifting that mantle and actually saying, like, okay, I know I've built the passive house standard, I've built the passive house certified standard, I understand all about the passive house principles. My team of subcontractors are all aware of the passive house principles, and we will build you a house to passive house standards. That's the ideal kind of company you want to be dealing with, because, as I say, they understand the whole concept of it. And as I say, it's everybody, it's all trades. There's no exception. It's all trades that need to be aware of what you're trying to do and work collectively together in order to achieve that end goal. And as I said earlier, if you can imagine that credit card
when you're talking through around.
Sorry.
Yeah, in terms of that's what was making me smile earlier when you're talking about the intricacies of it. I can, flashback to I'm in the process of I've just got the first HMO signed off, but I think the fire doors had about 3 or 4 goes around just to get the 3 mil gap correct right around those doors so that they're fitted correctly. And I'm like, let alone like taking the bath panel off, I don't even want to see. I don't want to see underneath the shower tray to see what's under there, to be honest, or the gap in behind the sockets. It's it frightens me to think about that, but yeah, so it's good. I guess more and more contractors will be coming in there. Obviously, specialising in it. It's it's a bit like where we've seen the legislation for smart meters come in, and obviously utility companies have had to put smart meters on the wall. It's creating jobs for people that there was never a job there before because nobody ever needed it. But actually specialising in the sustainable industry, any sustainable industry at the moment, is something that's going to be coming. There's going to be increased demand as the years go on.
Growing marketplace, 100%. I mean, the regulations are going to continue to be more stringent. Government are going to be, going to be introducing, kind of more stringent regulations all the time. So, I mean, certainly, if you're a building contractor and you were looking to say, well, how do I kind of future-proof my, my work base? Then you'd be saying, well, yeah, I really need to get myself up to speed on this because this is going to be the norm. It's maybe not the norm at the moment, but it won't be in too many years whereby that will be the norm. It'll be the new norm, if you like. So, everybody will be building to maybe not full passive house certified standards, but certainly adopting passive house principles. I have no hesitation in saying that.
Yeah, and I just wanted to break down even just on one of the examples that you mentioned there, just in terms of some numbers. So you'd said it's like 10-15% or 10 to 20% kind of potentially more than a self-build project as it stands just now. What is that? Yeah. What's the current average self-build sort of, just to put it in some sort of context for?
Well, it's always very, I never like just kind of speaking in terms of square meter rates because there are so many variables. It's almost like saying use cars as an analogy, Darren. If somebody says
Glasgow to London, and
how much is a car? Well, what kind of car are you talking about? You're talking about a Mini, or you're talking about a Bentley, or even if you're talking about a Ford Mondeo. Well, is it the basic Mondeo, or is it the one with the bells and whistles and the big engine and the fancy wheels and all the rest of it? I mean, they're all cars, but the specifications are all different, and housing is no different. You could build a rectangular. The most efficient house to build is a rectangular house, and that's why you'll see most of the major house builders build pretty rectangular, what I would call box houses. And I'm not being disparaging when I say that, but it's like boxes that are joined together because that's the most cost-effective way of building. Whenever you start having more ins and outs, more complicated roof, you have more glass on the as a percentage of the external fabric walls of the building, then that's going to cost you more. So there is no kind of standard X pounds per square meter. Yes, I could say it's going to cost you £1,500 to £1,200 a square meter, but dependent where you are in the country, that could change fairly dramatically. Because if you're building in the south coast of England, then you might struggle at that kind of figure. If you're building up in the north coast of Scotland, then you probably do it quite comfortably for that figure. So it very much depends on where you're building, what you're building, and to what standard you're actually building it to. Now I know that maybe sound a bit of a cop out.
I was trying to put it in context for me around. It's not. I was going to say from the north to the south of England. Of course, it's going to be completely varied. But where I was thinking, particularly from an energy point of view, if you just take the heating element of it, forget about if there's no heating system in it, like that one you mentioned in the Borders, that could be easily $2,500-3 grand.
Oh, absolutely.
Potentially, every single year. So you're talking like potentially over the course of 10 years, you're talking tens of thousands of pounds that you're going to get in terms of cost savings. And if that's something that's going to be passed down to generations to come, then that benefit's just going to be passed on similarly every single year.
Well, that's it. Because the other thing as well is you've got to forget, don't forget, is obviously the systems have got to be maintained. So it's not just the capital cost of actually installing them. You've then got the maintenance cost thereafter, your gas safety certificate, having to take out a contract for them to come and check it every year. And invariably after a period, they'll say to you, sorry, you can no longer get parts for that boiler. You're going to have to replace the boiler. Now, how long that's going to be, but obviously replacing a boiler, doesn't come cheap. So it's something that it's an ongoing expense. It's not just something you pay for and forget about. It's something that you will always be throwing money at. Now, whereas if you consider that to putting insulation in behind a wall, behind the plasterboard that you're never going to see, you're never going to touch, it's not going to require any maintenance. It's going to be there in 60 years' time exactly as it was the day it put in. So it's costing you nothing. It's always saving you, and you're doing nothing to it. So as I said earlier, you get one chance to do it cost effectively, and that's when you're building the house day one.
Yeah, and it's almost like it's that opportunity cost of not doing it that builds up over time as well.
Absolutely.
So I get into you tonight. I guess it is a bit that if you are considering building your own home, like just now or in the next few years, I know you're at an event this weekend actually, which we'll maybe speak a little bit about. But it certainly feels like a consideration that you should be like. I don't know if you're talking about this specific subject or self-build in general, but it does feel like it's something we should be considering if you're thinking, particularly if it's going to be a home for the next.
Yeah, most definitely. Your kind of sound's breaking up a wee bit, Darren, but yeah, I think I picked up the thread of that. Yes, there's no doubt if this, if you're building your forever home, then 100% you should do it. But even though it's a temporary step, you should always be building it as thermal efficient as you can, because if you imagine that when you come to sell the house, if you can show prospective purchasers, look, there's what my energy costs are, and they're coming from a house that's not particularly energy efficient, and they're spending hundreds, maybe thousands on their heating every year. If you can show them your bills and say, well, look, I'm only spending hundreds of pounds every year, then that's a huge incentive to people to buy your house, because that's a lovely, cozy house. And who doesn't like a lovely, cozy house that doesn't take much to actually run? It's like buying, again, a car. You would look at a car, one of the first things you look at, well, how many miles to the gallon do you get with it? Okay, now we're moving into all electric cars.
Yeah.
So again, we're going to see that exact same pattern move into the into the housing sector. A lot more of the energy we'll be using will be electric based rather than any of the fossil fuels.
It's a really good analogy. I like that. The cars, they move to electric.
Yeah.
So you've got, I don't know how my sound's holding up my end, but yeah, in terms of the event you're at over the weekend, do you want to speak a bit about that, how people can maybe find out a bit more about this and self-build in general, Mike?
Yes, it's kind of build it live. In fact, just give me a second. It's called the Build It Advice Weekend, and it's on the 15th and 16th of this month. So if you go into the Build It magazine, it's actually called Self-Build. I'm just trying to see if I can find where the website address is. But I'm sure if you just Google Build It magazine, you will see it there. It's a Build It Advice Weekend, and it's a virtual event that's being held over the whole weekend. There'll be speakers, of which I'm one, and there will be question and answer sessions. So there'll be lots of information to be had from that. So if you're interested in self-build at all, then most certainly it's something that you should kind of log into. You'll be able to see what the agenda is, and you can dip in and out to the ones that you feel that are of interest to you. Because obviously these days, we used to attend the exhibitions for these on a face-to-face basis, but of course since COVID hit, that hasn't been happening. So it's all done virtually these days.
And to be honest, in many sense, it's really good, because you can, like you say, you can nip in and out of the sessions. You can plan your day around the sessions that you're going to want to see, whereas you're either at the exhibition or you're not. So virtual's actually, for a lot of people, quite a good alternative.
Absolutely, because another thing as well is,
I don't know if my sound's going.
Yeah, no, you're okay. I heard what you said there. Yeah, no, certainly, because a lot of these exhibitions, are held down south. So it's not just a case of going to the exhibition. Quite often you've obviously got travel, you've got hotel accommodation, because you're thinking, well, I'm not just going to go for one day, I'm just as well going for 2 days. So it can become fairly expensive. Whereas obviously you can sit at home and get a lot of the information just sitting at home in your pajamas if you want. And it's costing you, it's costing you very little. So from that point of view, it's going to be very, a very good way of getting, kind of getting information on self-build.
Yeah. Well, I'll get all the links and things. I know it's just veering across. I close my blinds all the time. The sun's kind of sets and it just kind of glares over this room. So my curtains have been closed since the start. But yeah, I'll get all the links. I'll search for them and I'll drop it in here and I'll share it on the group. So anyone that's watching this back, then we'll be able to get the details as well. And if anyone's, I suppose, thinking about self-building in the next few years, I would absolutely check it out.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you can
dip in and out of.
Yeah, exactly. And if I go onto my website, I run kind of regular, free webinars. Just gives a bit more information, question and answer sessions. And every Thursday, I tend to do on Clubhouse. I do a session on Clubhouse at 7:30 to 8:30. So, but the website, if you go on there, you can register for for the webinars, and the website address is www.self-buildsuccess.co.uk. And it'd be great to see you on some of the webinars or the Clubhouse chats, and answer any questions you have on self-build. Because as I say, very passionate about self-build, I think having done it twice, the sense of satisfaction you get is something that's very difficult to put into words. It's just, the legacy you leave. Because my son, I'm the first self-built. My son now lives in the first self-built house I actually built. So, every time I go visit him, it's just I get a wee buzz thinking, oh, it's a house that I built.
Yeah, what a lovely thing to be able to do and pass on to your family as well. Phenomenal.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
So you mentioned Clubhouse there. It's not something I'm on yet. I believe Android, because I'm an Android user. I'm
it's just about to be. Yeah,
it's going to be, because it was over in the States, wasn't it? So, what's your handle so people can find you?
So what's it called again? Well, you've caught me short there.
Well, you can add it to the comments below, and I'll make sure it's there for sharing, Mike.
Yeah, okay. I'm just wondering if I could just find it quickly here, but yeah,
I'd imagine you would have still got Mike Cruickshank.
I'm sure it's at Mike Cruikshank. I'm sure that's what it is.
No numbers or anything like that. You're one of the early adopters.
Yes, I was in there pretty quickly. So yeah, it's just as I say, it's at Mike Cruickshank, MikeCruickshank. Yeah,
fantastic. Well, I'll drop all of that stuff in the comments below so anyone's watching back can see it. And I guess thanks again, Mike, for coming on and sharing your knowledge with us. It's I always learn something whenever we've spoken anyway. But I think the couple of stats that you dropped on me in terms of the amount of self-build in Ireland is one that sticks out to me tonight. I just absolutely no idea. But yeah, thanks so much.
No, that's good. No, I've enjoyed it. And as I say, say to people, there is no silly questions. So, don't be sitting back and say, oh, I'm not going to ask that question. Everybody would know that. There is no silly question. Ask whatever you want, and we're here to help.
Cool. Well, there's no questions that are here just now, so I will draw it to a close, Mike. But
okay.
But yeah, thanks again for coming in. Anyone that's got any questions on it and you're watching this on the rerun, just reach out to Mike. I will put all the links so that you can get in touch with him and check out this event at the weekend. Is it 15th and 16th? Have I got those dates right? Yeah, 15th and 16th.
15th, 16th, Saturday, Sunday. That's correct. Yeah, I think it's on from 10 o'clock in the morning till 5 p.m.
Fantastic. All right. So if you're interested in self-build, check that out. And we'll be back next week. And until then, thanks so much, Mike.
Thank you. Thanks, Darren. Enjoyed it. Thanks very much.
All right.
Bye, everyone. Bye.
Bye for now.